All right, so I'm going to assume that we're done with our attendance and stuff. So let's get started. So we'll be doing our lesson 4 today for the beginner track, and that's going to be more ReactJS. And before we get started, we'll just look at our lesson structure a bit. So right now we're at lesson 4, and next week we'll be doing our APIs in ReactJS. And after that, we'll have 2 more classes, which will be project days. So you just basically we'll introduce the project to you, and you just basically come in if you've got doubts or anything you need help with. If you need any help, if you've got any doubts or anything, we've got our office hours every Wednesday from 6 to 7. You can ping us up in Slack anytime. And yeah, please feel free to ask any questions during the session right now. So yeah, before we begin stuff, everything's up in Brightspace and Slack, and all the GitHub links are available. And I guess we covered this last time around. So it'd be kind of nice to have something like Visual Studio to see your code in. And yeah, the GitHub link for the 2022 session. So if you want to use React, as we said before, you need to install Node.js and npm. And here we've got the link attached for that. And so before we start on this lesson, let's review the stuff we learned in the previous lessons. So first, HTML and CSS. So HTML, it's a markup language. It's basically like the foundation of everything you see on the web. You've got tags, opening and closing tags, and you use tags to create the elements that basically all the elements you see in the website. CSS is basically just a way to style HTML. So you basically edit the HTML tags, you give it properties and change the way it looks, the places it's located in, and stuff like that. And now JavaScript. So it's a programming language that's really similar to C and Python. We use it in this context to make HTML more interactive and dynamic. So basically just make it respond to user interactions, change stuff in the HTML and the CSS while the program's running and stuff like that. Also, just a fun fact, when we are introducing variables in JavaScript, we try to use let or const. And now JSX. So JSX is basically used to define HTML in JavaScript. We use it to create reusable custom HTML tags. And well, we can basically treat it the same way we treat HTML. We can use the CSS the same way. We can give it attributes and stuff like that. All right, moving on to the lesson for today, more ReactJS. So what exactly is ReactJS? So it's basically a JavaScript framework that deals with front-end stuff. So we basically use it to create web pages using JavaScript, a lot of dynamic and modular stuff. And it's really well used. Companies like Facebook, Twitter, Netflix, and all these companies in the slide use it. And so it's pretty relevant and a pretty good skill to have. So there are some basic rules we follow when you're using ReactJS. So for starters, it follows all the JavaScript rules because JavaScript is like really integral. And the second rule is that the main file is usually index.js, and we really do not touch this file. Everything we edit is basically done in the components folder, which we'll be talking about more later, or in the app.js file. And the index.js has to include a line that says react dom.render towards the end to work. And this is kind of what it looks like. Index.js. So something like this, react dom.render. So basically just renders all the HTML stuff inside on app and all the components connected to app. So that's kind of really necessary. and it's automatically produced for you when you do the processes we told you about last time to produce a React file. So you really don't have to worry about that too much. So more React.js rules. Every component also needs a render function. Again, it basically looks the same. It's actually a pretty important part of a component. So say this is a component file, and the render function is where all the JSX stuff happens. It basically renders all the HTML stuff in here and sends it to the web page. So we really don't touch index.js. So all our main stuff happens in app.js. It's where you call in all the components and where you basically do all the beginner code. So, and all the custom components go in a separate component folder. So again, let me just move back to Visual Code. This is kind of what it looks like. So app.js, you call in all the components you use up here, you import them inside, and then you call the components. All of that happens in app. And all the components you have, it goes into a separate component folder in source. That's kind of good practice. So it is technically possible to use React without JSX, but that kind of never really happens because of how convenient JSX is to use with React. So yeah, just a fun fact throwing that out. So basically everybody uses JSX with React. And it's kind of possible to pass props, which are kind of like parameters in other programming languages, to React components when you're calling the component. And you can use the component code to modify the props. So this is kind of what it looks like again. So you basically, let's say this component called software, it's basically got a prop called day, and you basically send this value in, and that's it. So I know just throwing this in there, but if you want to remember, if you don't recall how to set up a React.js project folder, you can open up the slides for lesson 3 and follow the steps there. And yeah, props, basically a lot of what I mentioned. And it's kind of the same as HTML attributes. So you basically use the same syntax as an attribute as I mentioned before. And if you're trying to refer to a prop inside of a component, then you basically use just a sec. Yep. You basically use this format, this.props, the name of the prop. All right, so let's get started with demo 1. Again, all of this code is in the GitHub, so feel free to take it up and run it and test it out. Okay, so just to say, So this is basically the end result for demo 1. And so let's find out what really happens in here. So in demo 1, we're using two components called software and Saturday. So in each component, we're passing in two props, day, date, and lesson number and software. And we're giving in the values. And so let's go into the components. So in software, we're basically calling the components and putting that inside a local variable. And then we're basically going down here and using JSX to print it out in a paragraph. And so you basically have today's Saturday, October 10, which is not today, but that was the value we passed in. But that's kind of roundabout. You don't really have to do it like that. You can just basically call in the prop with the format we showed you before and pass it in the same way without having to do all that elaborate stuff of passing it into a local variable and then printing it out. So yeah, the next two lines are displayed because of the Saturday component. Cool. Let's get back to all right, so checkpoint 1. So create a ReactJS project and create two custom components, one with props and one that doesn't use props. So your components should kind of be like a header and info card. Feel free to get a bit creative with that and add them to your app.js render and import them into app.js, of course. So if you've downloaded the GitHub version, there's a blank component here that has all the essential features that you can use as a template, sort of. And let's give ourselves 10 minutes. And if you've got any doubts or questions, please feel free to ask. All right, then let's keep moving on. All right, so let's start with ReactJS states. So state is kind of like a local variable in a component. So it stores values that are specific to these, that only work with that specific instance of a component. So when the state changes, the component also changes with it. So states and props are different in that props are kind of like parameters or arguments, in that they're passed in one time into the component or from the outside. While state is like a local variable. It's passed in from the inside, it's changed inside. And yeah, it's basically a local phenomenon. So setting and changing states isn't really hard at all. So if you want to set up a state, you basically go towards the, yeah, sorry about that, folks. Yeah, something in the room just gave out. We got the projectors up and working again. So yeah, taking up where I left off a couple minutes ago, states, setting up states and changing states. So setting up state is really easy. You just have to use the first block of code we have here. So inside the inside the constructor props, you just say this.state equals the key name and the value. So this is kind of what it looks like. Yeah. So this is kind of what it looks like. You say this.state equals, say the key could be anything, semester, year, timestamp, whatever, and then the value inside here. So the value could be a prop, the value could be something manual you enter, or the value could be something like this. So This function is what we basically use to create a timestamp. So I'll just display the result momentarily. And if you want to change the state, you use this block over here. So again, an example will be good. So you use something like this maybe. So you say set state and then you change what it looks like. Or there's another option. You can do something like this where you modify a state using the props and the state. So that's another option you have here. Again, this code is available in the GitHub and you can tinker around with it if you want. So let's move on to demo 2. So in demo 2, we're basically using the Purdue component, and you're passing in a prop called 2019. So Purdue. All right, so as I mentioned before, we have the state variable here, and we have 3 keys and values: semester, year which is using the prop that we passed in before, and timestamp, which again is using this function here to produce a timestamp value. So the timestamp value kind of looks like this. It's kind of easily recognizable, as you can see. So in this program, all we're doing is printing out the semester name and year number, and then printing out the timestamp. So that's basically it. And then we are basically using the function we saw before in the slides to change states, to change semester to spring, and to change year from 2019, which is what we passed in the prop, to 2022. And again, the result. So we call it twice, and yeah, this is what's passed out. Because we change it to spring in 2022, that's what is printed out instead of the initial value, which was fall in 2019. All right, so let's move on to checkpoint number 2. So in this checkpoint, you're just going to be modifying the component you created in checkpoint 1 so that it includes state variables. And we would like you to add a timestamp with each card. So again, this is the function that was used. And again, just look at demo 2 for what's happening and add in a timestamp. Okay, so I'm assuming y'all are done. If anybody isn't, feel free to ping us up in chat or something, and we'll definitely help you out. So we're moving on to the next, to the next part, which is adding user interactivity. So let's see how we can use ReactJS to change what's displayed through the efforts of the user. So the thing we're going to be looking at right now is an on-click function. And one of the more important things for making sure an on-click works is a callback binder. So it basically binds this keyword to a specific keyword again, because this is like a bit of a complicated thing in JavaScript. We use this all the time, and sometimes it's considered better, sort of a more safer approach, if you bind a function using this and then use that function. So the syntax we have for that is this dot function name equals this dot function name dot bind, and this inside brackets, parentheses, same thing. And you add this inside the constructor. So this is kind of what it looks like. So this is kind of what it looks like. So the function in question is called winGame. So we just add this inside the constructor around the same place where we add the states. So I mean, we're moving on to demo 3 too. So demo 3. Okay, so in demo 3, we're calling in the Boilermakers component. So this is kind of what the end result looks like. So we've got a button here. We've got a paragraph. We've got a couple of paragraphs over here. So what happens here is when you click the button, the number in this second paragraph increases by 1 every time you click the button. So how exactly do we make that work? So we've got a bunch of states over here. We've got a state called mascot and sport, which we use in the first paragraph here, is the first sentence. And we've got another state called number of wins. So that's going to be the count that influences the updating count over here. So we've got the winGame function over here, and that every time the winGame function is called, it's supposed to increase the number of wins state by 1. So moving down to our render, we first print off the first sentence. We basically say our mascot is call in the first state and call in the second state over here. So we've got that sentence. And then on the second part, we call in a header. And then we basically print out another sentence, which has got the number of wins state inside it. And then we create a button and we give it the onClick attribute. And this attribute calls in the winGame function. So what happens is that every time you click this button, the winGame function is called and it adds 1 to the number of wins state. So every time you click this button over here, since number of wins is the variable that's used over here, it increases by 1. And that's basically that for the demo. So let's go back over here to checkpoint number 3. That'll be the final checkpoint. So in this checkpoint, we want you to take the component you created for checkpoint number 2 and add a button that will update the timestamp displayed for the user. And you're going to have to use a callback binder for this to create the function, to help the function that you create for updating the timestamp. And you definitely want the timestamp to be in a component state. And again, as a reminder, this is the function you use to get a timestamp. So yeah, let's give ourselves 10-15 minutes. If I were you, I'd look at both the demo 3 code and the demo 2 code. It's a simple matter of replacing a bunch of variables. And if you've got any doubts and stuff, feel free to hit us up on the chat here or just call out.